exposed. I feel like normally on my Zoom call, it's like very dark and it's
Yeah.
completely quiet in my house,
I'm
and
in
I
my
have
room.
like
I'm in my
yeah,
safe
I have my
space.
headphones on. This is like so much.
Yeah, you're
more
getting a crash
intense.
course in the streaming side of things.
Yeah.
You know.
It's very professional too.
Yeah. I don't know how much that light did anything, but it makes me feel better as
Yeah.
a dark skin dude.
Yeah, there's also like no way that our skin tones are gonna match up.
No,
like,
God, no. I mean,
perfectly.
look,
Like,
if
I'm
it
like
took-
the most pale person on the planet.
If it took iPhone to get to 14 before they started figuring out skin color,
Right? Yeah, we're definitely not gonna figure out.
Yeah, we're not gonna figure it out with one light.
in
So.
the 10-15 minute hack job that we
Yeah, no
set
doubt.
all this up in.
No doubt. Well,
Nice,
hey,
man.
thanks for having me on. Really appreciate the opportunity. And,
Yeah.
I think we know each other fairly well from work, and it's nice to have an opportunity to jump in with you.
Yeah. I didn't. It's funny. I picked the title "Working Late," but we're literally working late.
Yeah, today is
literally in the
real
office,
life.
an empty office in darkness.
No doubt.
I'm
And
sure
it's,
we're gonna get interrupted by the cleaning.
I know, right?
people at
Imagine
some
that.
point. Yeah.
They come in pretty late. I walked in one time when I forgot my laptop at 9 o'clock, and they were here. So
Yeah.
fingers crossed.
Yeah,
they're
a little
not
more
going to be
time.
jumping in
Yeah,
the middle.
yeah.
But yeah, no, it's cool, and it's nice to try and play around with the space in here. Little by little, it's becoming a studio.
Yeah, we're getting there. Yeah, for sure.
We got the hue lights overhead. We got a couple of the other things.
Yeah, it's coming together.
Yeah.
But well, cool, man. Yeah, I'm pretty excited to talk to you because I've recorded 10 of these so far, and because I'm an industrial designer, all I do is think about industrial design.
Yeah.
All the people I know are industrial designers. My network is like kind of limited.
Yeah.
But like you work here in the studio doing UXUI, and I feel like I don't know a lot about UXUI. I did like a little bit of a stretch
Sure.
assignment here a few months ago.
Yep.
But I would imagine like a lot of people in the industrial design network kind of are aware of UXUI more from like a farther away perspective, but
No.
I'm curious to like just learn more and like know about the field
Yeah.
and like your background and
And I would say, for more of it is on the UI side of it, right? Because UX, we all play in the space, right?
Right.
In a way, right? And so, for me, UX UI falls into the category of the wireframing and the planning side of things in terms of laying out the designs that you're trying to set up and working through stuff. But in general, I think we all play in the same space. The discovery process is similar.
Yeah.
Walking through the steps of the double diamond and kind of going through that
Right.
through our workflow is similar. But in terms of setting up documentation, right? Like some people like me, I jump straight into sketching in Figma, right?
Right.
I'm not necessarily
Right.
drawing out the sketch like you would if you were drafting. So I think for some it's different, right? We have one person here who is very heavy into hand drawing.
Yeah, I've seen
Aziz.
those, yeah.
And and then others, like Laura and myself, we like to jump right in and kind of feel it out as we go and draw it
Yeah.
out on paper.
Yeah.
So I would say a lot of the initial processes leading up to when we start designing are very similar.
Yeah. A lot of like similar research and
Yep.
like user validation, which I know like
For sure.
there's
And
some
mood
people in the
boarding
studio in
and
here for
all
sure.
all that set up ahead of time.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
a lot of that stuff. Like I definitely see the similarities in
Do
some
you-
of the meetings.
Do you mood board for UX/UI?
Once in a while, it really
What is
depends.
the mood board? It's more for what the UI, like the just
Yeah,
like
if
the
you were going to
trend.
draw like
Yeah.
a fresh UI altogether, like
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
for one of the projects that I'm working on, I might set up a mood board altogether because right now they've kind of got a bunch of different color gamuts and a bunch of different directions that they're playing in. And I think for
Yeah.
them, it's going to be important to find what is the brand, right? Versus like this
Right.
product has this color and this one has this color and this one has this
Right.
color. What is our outward persona for the rest of the world to see? Versus each product having its own color. It's kind of like
Right.
it's almost like Adobe in that sense, but Adobe, the umbrella has its one setup, right? It's red, it's white, it's
Right,
got
right.
it's got a little bit of black and stuff, but then each of the products can have its color. So
That
I think
makes
for
sense.
this, we're trying to condense that down to one specific color value because you're not getting anything out of the different color sets from each one. And from a UX UI perspective, it's a little bit cleaner to
Right.
develop the one design system for that
That's
versus
cool.
trying to manage all three when there's not really that much of a change between them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
For sure. But I guess we should like back up a little bit, because not everyone will know you or know
Sure.
like your background and your work. So I guess like we work together at Signify. You're a UX/UI designer.
Yep.
You do a whole lot outside of that as well. You manage multiple systems and design languages, similar to what you mentioned. But I guess like to back up,
Yep.
like how did you kind of get started? Because I know you have a background in web development, but I don't really know like all the specifics. I guess like where did this all start? Like did it start in college?
It evolves.
Yeah.
So for me, I started out just being interested in computers in general and IT.
Okay.
My dad was a programmer, so we had equipment always around. The first computer I ever played with was a VIC-20. And then we went all the way through the stages, right? We went to Commodore 64. And these were all the like relics that he got from his job, right? He was essentially working on not vacuum tube computers, but he was he was working with tape drives back when they first started. He was working in baking, and he went all the way through that. And I got interested. I mean, I played with the first iterations of Windows and BASIC and all that sort of stuff, and even command line back then.
Jeez.
And then I progressed, and little by little I got into the UI of systems, and then I got into marketing in high school, and another program called the Academy of Finance, and kind of wanted to put all that together.
Yeah. But so this is in like grade school.
This is all grade school and high school. Yeah.
Okay, so you're like young.
Like I knew
really
for me,
young.
computers was going to be part of my progression into college. Like I was an
cool.
athlete, and I knew computers needed to be there.
Yeah.
And then I really fell in love with marketing.
Yeah.
And
it's like beyond like entertainment or a hobby. Like you're actually going in and program. Like you're learning like key skills with computers. It's not just like playing around. Or
for sure.
whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I never programmed, but I was playing, the earliest video games that were out there, besides Atari. I was playing like little basic video games and stuff, and playing Snake and all that. And
nice.
I would pay attention to the UI of those systems, and then little by little I got into marketing in high school, and I said, okay, I need to find a way to meld all this stuff together.
Yeah.
And then I knew I wanted to play volleyball in school, so I looked for a place that had a volleyball program, and then at the same time I looked at web design as the way to join marketing and computers.
That makes sense.
And I said, okay, let's try this out. Let's go into school and try this out. And I fell in love with it. We had a great program at Johnson & Wales. You get out what you put in. It's definitely not like, RISD was right down the street. I never got to take classes there.
What was the school? Johnston and Wales?
Johnson and Wales,
is it like private, just kind of like general?
No, so they're known as a hospitality school. So when I bring up the school, everybody goes, oh, you study culinary, right? And I'm like, no, I actually was there for technology. And the funny part about that is I actually stayed on the culinary campus for the first year. So I was with kids who were literally waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, pressing their uniform and stuff. It was insane. It was kind of crazy sitting there and living with kids who were getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, getting their knife kits sharpened and all that good stuff. Like it killed my sleep habits. But
so when you start going into like web design, was the program fairly young?
Yeah. So it was in like its first few years. Like we basically opened it up, and it's now evolved into UXUI, and it's changed along with the industry. So when I went in, there was web design and development, and it was one degree. So you learn development along the way, and you take it as far as you want. If you want to go heavy into computer science, you can keep doing that. Or you do a little bit of what I did, which was more of a jack of all trades program, and I latched onto a Professor Santos of all people, who was a freelancer himself, and he taught us like the process of like gaining clients and doing pitches and working as a group, as almost as a design studio within the design studio.
Nice.
So typically what we would do is we would have groups of 4, and we would have to do a pitch to him, and we would have to figure out where everybody's niche was and work through it while still learning design at the same time. And then because he was a freelancer, I think that also taught us empathy for the user. And I came out of college knowing like for me, user experience was all about just working for the user and making sure that whatever I'm making works well for them, and there's no major pitfalls in what I'm designing.
That's a good early lesson. When you're going through this program, is this like pre.com era, or is it in the .com era? This
was like AOL dial-up was still a thing, and
so it's like right at the start.
Like the .com boom had started, and it was like the other search engines, the Alta Vistas, and all those other search engines were on the backswing, right? Like AOL had basically taken over.
Yeah.
Google was starting to really make some hay. I mean, Facebook came out, and it was a college-only thing at the time.
Right, yep.
So I got to use Facebook when it was in beta.
That's awesome.
And it was very different. Like, you had to use your EDU address to get in at the time. Like, it was focused on schools at the time.
That's so interesting, too, especially hearing you say that you were learning a lot about, like, user empathy and user research, because I feel like that... I didn't see as much of that being publicly talked about until, like, I would say, like, the last 5 to 10 years or so.
Yeah.
At least from, like, my point of view. So, like,
definitely.
If you were kind of, like... I just don't know, like, what the trajectory of, like, of your industry was.
Yeah.
If, like, that stuff was really... was that stuff kind of everywhere and, like, a common practice, or was that, like, more of a...
No, definitely not. I mean, when I started, it was web design. There was no such thing as UX.
It's just, like, people figuring it out,
nobody knew that name yet. Everybody that was empathetic towards the user kind of gravitated towards each other.
Yeah.
And we all talked about it, but nobody had a name for it yet, right?
Right.
And then the industry changed. And then there was, there was I think it was strictly user experience at that time. And then it kind of flexed into product design. And then the ID guys got mad at us because we were taking a word that was more for
which they're still mad by.
A
lot of people listening to this are still mad.
right. So, and then we moved back out of that to traditional UXUI, and now there's service design. There's all the different types of
so many disciplines,
disciplines, at least on the programmatic side. So it's interesting. I mean, I would say if it weren't for somebody like him who was business focused, I think it would have been very different. And then Johnson & Wales also had the internship program. So you cannot graduate without getting an internship.
Yeah.
And that was huge. I got a job at a local design studio. Got to see people doing it actively there.
Did they help set that up, or was that something that you had to I
had to go out and find it. So they had a client list of general folks who applied to be host internships, and then you have to go out and interview the whole nine. I had to find my way to Newport. Thankfully, I had a car at the time.
Yeah.
So for me, that was 45-minute drive to my job, and during that time, I only had one class, and then I had volleyball.
Nice.
So I'd go there. I'd work a 5-6 hour day. Participate on their projects. Come back.
Think about how simple that sounds now,
right?
Compared to, now you're married, you have 2 kids. If only things were so simple.
Oh
my gosh! Volleyball internship, hanging out.
I know, right? And now it's come full circle. Now it's coaching basketball and constantly busy.
Yeah.
But
so you get this first internship. So what was your role there? Were you doing web design?
Yeah. So at the time, it was what I would consider now, if I were trying to classify it with now's terminology, it would be UI design and UI development. There was definitely a side of UX, but I'm working actively on their projects. So for the most part, I was putting a face on it with UI, and then a little touch of UX, and then also doing the front end code for it.
So you're basically getting a website layout, or there's some sort of rough, I assume, and you're going in and basically prettying it up, and then kind of getting the initial functionality.
Yeah. So I would sit on their project briefs, and we would we would talk about the client the client that we were going to work on for the day. They would throw their wireframes up on screen, and they'd say, okay, the client has seen this. We've gone through it. We've got to make a couple changes here and there.
Yeah.
Dave, can you throw these couple UI elements together, and then can you develop it? I'd project out my timeline, say, I've got a few hours on this, a couple days on that, and then by the time all was said and done, we would deliver it to the client, and the rest was history. Then off to the next client.
Yeah, that's cool. And this is all Dreamweaver.
Yeah, back in the Dreamweaver days.
For a lot of people who don't know about web design, everything kind of had to be like you're not building assets and then like dragging and dropping them on like something on like Squarespace. You're building like H1 headers and like you're having to actually like code
you were hand coding it.
You have to like hand code like the size of the typeface and everything has to be like
there's a lot more that you had to do back then by hand, and now things have definitely gotten there's still plenty of people hand coding, but things for folks like me who know enough to be dangerous but at the same time can hand code my own thing, like something like a Webflow or even a Wix. I mean, Wix is lower on the scale, but you can do so much with those products if you know enough to be dangerous. And that's kind of where I'm at now. Is like I just don't want to hand code my own thing unless I have to.
That's interesting.
Or there's something completely out there that I want to try.
But this is a question like I'm probably showing my own ignorance, but like as a result of all that, is web design still like a prominent field, or has it kind of just shifted to this like UX UI?
I would say now it's classified as UI design. Web design itself, the term is basically gone. Like, I still, for some people, it's funny because one of the things that people, when I first got into UX UI, right, when it became a term, people would ask me what I do for work. And I would say, web design, because I didn't want to go through the process of explaining it.
Right.
Like, I'm empathetic for the user and this and that. And, like, people's eyes would roll.
It's like a real hit at the party.
Right. Like, good luck explaining that. So I'd just be like, and like now, my description of it is I'm a bit of everything. Like, I'm a content creator, I'm a designer, I get into video, a little bit of audio production and stuff. I think in some ways that's helped me, in some ways it's hurt me, because jack of all trades, master of none. You're kind of a little bit of everything, and it's hard to really classify you. But at the same time, I think it's opened doors to so many different opportunities around design and around helping the customer. So I get to see a lot more of the different phases of things.
Yeah, we have a lot of that in industrial design too. Like, it's a good degree to get if you're not completely sure of like what you want to be doing, because it sounds very similar where we're learning a lot of like model making. You could go super deep on that, or 3D modeling. You can specialize in like 3D rendering and visualization, or user research or whatever. So it sounds similar where it tees in a lot with your career has this ability to kind of like morph and change over time, but like,
and you could pick your path too on the UI design side, right? You could be an illustrator, you can be a pixel artist, you could be you can do a whole bunch of different things. You can be a video game designer for that matter. You can be somebody who strictly does UI for video games. The possibilities are really endless when it comes to that, and I love that about the field. I love that. That's like, cool. If I wanted to, I could go get into gaming. Now, good luck getting a job without knowing somebody in the industry and proving out that you can do it. But that possibility is there.
Slightly more competitive.
A little bit
in the video game industry.
I mean, this
it's crazy. I was just reading the other day. Video games now are like, it's like a multi-trillion-dollar industry. I mean, I didn't realize it was like so big, because I always viewed that as like an esoteric career when I was a kid, and now it's like
bigger plus our parents, right? Like, you and I are both video gamers, so our parents were like, "Come on, don't spend all your day doing that." And now it's like there's people streaming it. That there's a whole terminology in UX UI called gamification,
right?
And there's the other aspect of that where people get into microtransactions, right? Which that's completely hated. And then, but on the other side of it, like, gamification is huge. Look at Duolingo. Look at all these projects that take gamification into account, and that's so much of how the platform operates. That gratification that you give the user and pulling them in with gratification and almost like cheering them on along the way, right? That's a huge part of it. Conversational design is another aspect, right?
What does that mean?
Conversational design is almost like ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT is a conversation with the AI, right?
Right.
A conversational UI was like the step before that, where you would type in a specific set, or not that you would type something in, but you would set up the onboarding process, for example, in a conversational format. So, hey, what's your name? Type in your name.
It's like that call and response kind of.
Exactly. There was a great product. I wish I remembered the name of it. It was a competitor, Mercer, when I was working for them, Health Benefits Administration, and they were well known for this conversational approach to signing you up for insurance. And it would ask you, hey, what's your name? What's your age?
Right.
You know, and it would try, in some cases, it would try to avoid asking you a specific question about your health. It would try to ask, like, questions around, like, if I want to know if somebody has a disability of some sort, I might ask a question of, like, are you in pain? What sort of things? And I'll ask those conversational questions to get to the final result, and then output the final result. And that was the whole idea behind conversational UI, and you still see aspects of that today. In different levels of design. You see it a lot more in mobile, especially in onboarding processes on mobile. Yeah,
I was gonna say, like, as you're describing it, that sounds like something that I feel like is almost like a given now. With like any app, I feel like what you're describing is probably the onboarding process for just about everything.
And that statement right there is where, as a UX UI designer, you should know that it works, right?
Yeah.
Like, you don't necessarily, a lot of what we do is educated, not educated guessing, but educated responses to things, right? If you have a challenge that you're trying to get the user to follow, what is the best possible avenue to get them there, right? Is conversational.
That was something that like really stood out when I was doing the stretch assignment with you guys, is there's like certain things where it's just like, this works, the user's familiar with this because they have this same interaction with all these other apps, like just don't fuck around with this. Like, just keep it the way it is.
Identify the pattern and stick to it.
Keep it, because it's otherwise you're just going to end up confusing everyone. You're complicating the development process. Everything just gets way too. It kind of seems like it can just easily spin out of control.
Absolutely. And the other side of that, right, though, is the innovation.
That's what I was going to ask
challenge
about.
That norm. Is, can you do something that's outside of that norm that ends up feeling more natural, right? That's why I'm super into what was this thing, the AI phone,
the Rabbit,
the
R1
like, I'm
or whatever.
super into checking out how that's gonna go, because on the one hand I'm like, hell no, nobody's gonna put down their phone, but on the other side of it I'm like, well, you know, if it is literally that simple and if the results are good, maybe you know, maybe I don't know, because God help us if, like, as a UX UI designer, I'm terrified if that works, because that's going to put me out of a job.
I didn't even really think about that.
There's no UI.
Like, in this world of AI, like, if you need to figure out, like, how do you design that? Like, how do you design the way that thing is choosing flows or choosing, like, orders of operation or whatever it is? Like,
it's programmatic and it's learning. And that's a scary thing for a UX UI designer, is thinking about, like, if this does well and it truly delivers on what the user expectation is, we're definitely out of jobs at that point, at least in the mobile space.
Yeah. But at the same time, like,
but at
the same time, like you mentioned, like, can it innovate?
Right.
Like we could just use the same flow or the same onboarding or whatever it is, but I feel like that is non-emotional, and that it will eventually, like, just bum people out. You know what I mean? If everything is just completely bland and completely the same.
Right.
But that's what I wanted to ask about, is, like, and we're so off track, because I wanted to know more about like the steps of, like, getting from web to UX, but I also think this is super interesting. So, like, if you have things that you know work, like, how do you then approach innovation for UX UI specifically? Because, like, I know how I do it for industrial design, and there's a lot of pitfalls, and we could go, like, super deep on that, but, like, UX UI is so different. I'm just curious, like, how do you approach innovation?
For me, it's iteration. You know, I start with the tried and true and kind of lay that out and go, okay, I like where this is going. It feels right.
So starting with, like, the base, like, the known way of doing it.
And then I'll start to deviate from there. I'll start to sketch out a little bit of a different experience and say, okay, what can I do with the selection process here? What can I do with the way that we question the user? How do I approach, you know, how do I hit them with a different approach to the same problem?
Right.
And is this truly going to help? Right. So this is like your paper prototyping, right? Or your digital prototyping.
Right.
You're putting that in front of somebody and just seeing how it performs. And if you're gathering good analytics and you're doing good questionnaires and feedback sessions along the way, that'll help inform you if you're on the right track.
Interesting.
But yeah, for me, it's all about it's all about the iteration along the way. And generally, as I'm going through the design process, I'll be able to feel it out, right? Like like if I start sketching something out and I start playing with it myself, and then I might run it by, they used to call it the grandparent test in UXUI, right? Where you put it in front of literally your parents, right? And
like what do you call it? Like a non-expert.
Yeah,
non-expert.
Yeah. So you put it in front of them and just see how it performs, right? And see where they get stuck, right? And moderated testing is great for that. A lot of it is dedicated to moderated testing and seeing how that goes. And unmoderated testing is good, but you end up having to rely on the person to be a really good narrator at that point. I'd rather sit over their shoulder, whether they know I'm there or not, and just kind of see. And if I see the mouse pointer pause in a certain spot for a little bit too long, or something of that nature, right? Generally, that's going to lead to somebody, when you're taking analytics, generally it'll lead to something what's called bounce rate, and that just means that the person said, "Fuck it, I'm up."
Yep.
Yeah. So those are the kinds of things I look into, and that's something, at least in the corporate landscape, that for my previous jobs, it's a lot harder to come by. Like some jobs are very good about taking analytics. Some jobs are not. Some dedicate their analytics completely to sales, and they have no analytics on the software itself. So you have no idea where the user left. Then at that point, you're just making educated guess after educated guess, testing a lot, with users and seeing how they interact with it there, because you're not going to get anything after the fact until you start surveying or, listening to Reddit, listening to, a lot of it is just where are they giving you feedback and following that feedback and then making a new educated guess.
Yeah. I feel like that's like the big appeal of UX UI is you get that like really rapid like iteration. Like you get such an immediate feedback loop because like one, you can update the product over time. Like industrial design, once we tool something up, like once we invested $1 million of tooling, like that thing is what it is. Like it is not changing. Like maybe there's a running change. You can kind of pull out some tricks here and there, but like for the most part, it's locked.
It's gonna stand for a couple years before you make that iteration.
But like you guys are able to evolve over time, and I think too, like when you're kind of talking about your process, like because you're able to basically like sketch or ideate like in Figma in a software where you're prototyping as you're thinking.
Yep.
You have like this ability to just like immediately like continue to evolve what you're working on.
You can take those initial screens and almost use them as tracing paper. You put a new design right over the top of it, see what's changed, and sometimes I even like doing that. Like I'll do, they have like an A/B screen switcher where you can like crossfade between the two, and I'll look at I might look at a drawer that I built on the right or on the left and say, okay, let me crossfade between the two. Am I seeing enough change here that it's worth development time, right? And do I really feel like I've done something better for the user here, or did I just put more lipstick on the pig, right?
Right.
And that definitely has a tendency to happen. Some people will get stuck in, I just want to improve the UI and forget completely about the UX when they're building. And you can spend hours upon hours, and if it's not going to lead to efficient use of development time, you're going to get frustrated by the fact that you just sunk all this time into something.
Yeah.
And that tends to happen in business a lot, where designers will lose sight of UX, the improvement on the UX and the value to the user, and end up sinking a ton of time into something that just isn't going to end up getting developed.
Right.
Or they don't keep track of what skill sets they have on their development team. Like they don't need to know exactly what can be coded, but they need to know how skilled is the development team in order to be able to bring their idea to fruition, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. So is there like because I feel like UX UI can tend to, like you mentioned, it can tend to be all over the place with like titles and structures and different ways of working. Like, is there an ideal setup for developing that? Because I've seen where, like for here, like where we work at Signify, a UX UI designer, it's like it's one title. Like you're doing the UX and the UI. But I've seen like other places where they'll have only UI and only UX. Like, what is kind of the ideal structure, just based on like your experience? Not that it obviously depends. Like it's not. We're not. This is just our opinion. But.
Yeah, it's not a one size fits all. I would say it depends on the skill set, right? Like I know there's a ceiling for me when it comes to UI. If
Right,
somebody's asking
okay.
for something hyper photorealistic and like
They want
3-dimensional
3D
and
yeah,
layered
yeah.
and all this, like that's where I stop. Like I'm
Right.
minimalistic to the T. You know, I might have a couple of things that lean into skeuomorphism and different sorts of aspects, but you know, I'm starting to study 3D a little bit more with spline, right? But
Right.
that's not heavily involved in the industry, right? Like we're
Right.
just now starting to see a little bit more isometric play and people making UX/UI that plays in that space. But it's a
Gotcha.
lot more in the lander space than in the UI itself for the product. It's more how do you present to the market.
So it's like if you have like smaller teams, you're either kind of like picking your battles. So
Yep.
you're saying like we want to have the best UI, but maybe our UX is a little whatever, or we want to have like the best UX and maybe we like take a hit on the UI. Or if you're like a bigger group, you just kind of hire the specialists.
Yeah,
for
I mean, it
each
depends on the
thing.
size of the project too, right? Like if you're developing an application that, you know, is super in depth and it's like almost like a drawing program or something like that, right? If you have a ton of developers on the team set, let's just say you have 10 developers
Right.
and they're all super high skilled, right? Then I would say you probably want to have one, maybe two UX designers.
That's kind
a
of like
couple
a
of UI
good
designers,
ratio.
right? Or
Okay.
one UI designer, just so that the voice. When I say the voice, it's the look and feel. Just so that is consistent.
Yeah.
Now, if you've got a UX UI designer who's strong enough to handle both sides, that's great. But they may tend to become a bottleneck. If there's too many programmers to one designer, then you're going to find that designer is going to get overwhelmed, especially if you ask them to do some of the front end process too, right? Like the discovery, that's where a spot where a service designer comes in huge handy, right? A traditional UX researcher comes in big time handy. Like I enjoy that aspect of it, but for me, like I want to be the one acting on the research, not necessarily performing the research.
Interesting.
Even though I like that part, but
yeah.
for me, I like being reactionary and taking all that and building upon it more so than executing on that part.
Huh.
I like to be more strategic.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say all in all, if you're at like the perfect project team, right? And we'll just say small scale, almost like a freelance project, right? At least one UX designer, one UI designer if that designer needs help. And then it depends on how much UX is needed. If you need to add in a researcher, ideally, somebody who specializes in it, and then to that team of designers, 5-6 developers who are super efficient.
Interesting.
A PM, a PO to keep everything on schedule.
Yeah.
And then that should be it. That's like a team of 10
Yeah.
solid individuals who can go and work together and build upon that. And in this day and age in Figma and FigJam, being able to collaborate on workshops and setting up different ways of, going through persona documentation and working through, different ideation together and being in that collaborative space. That to me is kind of the ideal setup for a small team. And then from there, you can branch out to all different ways.
Yeah. That is interesting, though. It does tend to... You just need developers.
Yeah.
You need,
you have to have
those
a developer.
guys to just go in there and build it out.
I mean, someday no code will get strong enough where you can do a lot with a little, but you still need somebody, even with no code, you need somebody to tie it all together and create all these different decision patterns that you're making in your designs and all the error states and success states and making sure that things don't end up looping on each other.
So... Maybe the backup then, like to that, like because I feel like you're so knowledgeable about like I don't know, you call that the back? Was that the back end?
Yeah,
like
the
when it's actually
side of things.
Built?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're doing web design, I would imagine like that role is very hybrid. Like you're doing kind of like an equal amount of like programming and design, right?
So I'm
Or
more
more
of a
than
special
you-
case. Like
yeah.
usually designers don't have a side of development.
Okay.
It's becoming more of a thing now, and I think even more so now. Like I think in college programs, and I haven't looked into the way that they're teaching it now, but I feel like more designers are coming out with some form of programming knowledge. Right? They're being taught to learn React. They're being taught to learn Flutter and different frameworks that should make things easier.
Interesting.
They're just not getting super heavy into code, but they need to understand it enough that they can have that dialogue between a programmer and say, This is what I want. This is how I want you to build it. Please go do it efficiently.
Yeah, you still need to be able to like talk to a certain extent.
Yeah,
I mean, to like explain what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I can code up whatever, but it's not going to be efficient code, and it's going to run like shit, and it's going to be heavy, and But if I was front end developing it, which is just kind of putting the face on top of the programming, I'm game. I don't want to do it all that often, but I can do it.
Huh. That's cool. So sorry, just to like I'm curious just now to back up. So like you get this internship, you're kind of working in like web design. Like how do you get this like link from web design to now being like, as you've kind of like shown, like this deep expert for like UX UI? Like what does that like bridge look like?
So it's funny, after college and that internship, I actually got hired as a programmer first. So I went into...
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
okay.
I ended up, like, folks looked at my resume, and I applied to a bunch of jobs, and they said, hey, your UI design skills aren't quite there just yet. Can you come in as a programmer? I said, sure, why not?
Because as we've now learned, they tend to need more programmers than
and I had enough chops in it that I was dangerous. So they said, sure, why don't, let's hire you as a developer. And at that time, Flash was big. So I was working in action scripting for Flash. Which was, I mean, at the time when search engines were starting to really become a thing and search engine optimization was really becoming a thing, Flash was horrible for that. There was no meat to it for Google to latch onto. It was just a canvas. And it couldn't be searched.
Because nothing's embedded in it. It's basically just like an interactive...
so I started out in that, and then I moved on from there to my first job in Massachusetts, which kept me here, which was at Lycos. And that was one of the relics of the .com boom.
Nice.
They were hanging on. It was Angel Fire and Tripod, which I don't know if you ever had one of those sites, but that was my first job coming into Lycos, was managing Tripod and like trying to revitalize it and build it back up to see if people would build sites on Tripod again.
Wow.
And we got some traction. There was definitely some people around. I think they were mostly 60 years old, but but it was cool. It was a fun job, and I got to redesign the Lycos homepage at the time.
Nice.
So redesigning the search engine homepage and trying to deliver. At the time, Yahoo and AOL and all these were trying to deliver more than just search content on their homepages. Even Google at the time, before they really condensed it down to just the search box, right?
Right.
All of these companies were trying to find, like, can we deliver on weather? Can we deliver, like, how do we give them that newspaper feel without, like, delivering the entire newspaper on the homepage, right?
Yeah.
Because we were still in that sort of stage between people wanting this, like, news site like Yahoo and just uninhibited search like Google had gotten to.
Yeah, now that you mention that, I remember that era. It's like there was like MSN and AOL and Yahoo. You're all right. They were all kind of like that. They're all like front page of a newspaper is like a good way to describe it.
Yeah, and what I ended up doing with Lycos was condensing that down and stripping away the newspapery feel, right, and cutting it down to a giant search box. And a couple of select widgets, and then the user could customize them themselves. But by this point, Google had already gone to just the search box,
right,
and a few links. Like, Lycos was already behind the times. People weren't using it as a search engine heavily.
Why did things progress away from that? Is it just like, I guess it's like, I just want to see the thing that I want to see.
Yeah.
Like, people aren't like logging on to get like a fully holistic view of everything.
Yeah, no, it was content overload, I think, at the time. Like, people were into it because they didn't have anything better, and they still were moving away. Like, people were half into newspapers, half online, right? So newspaper was still a thing.
It is like that transition.
Yeah, so it was like the continuation of the newspaper, right? Like, you would read the Times in the morning, and then you would go to the website later in the day. You'd go to your job, you got websites all in front of you. I need all my stuff in one place, right? I got my fantasy team, I've got my stock ticker, I've got, and that was your one-stop shop for all your content. Now, you've got an app for this, an app for that,
right.
You don't need all the fluff on a search engine. You just want an answer.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. I'll have to go now. I'll have to go back after when I get home tonight and like go on the Wayback Machine.
Yeah,
and,
man.
Look at how some of these, because now that you say it, I do remember it was like just walls of text, like so dense.
Yeah.
You have pop up.
Walls.
There was
widgets.
like embedded advertising, pop up advertising. Like it's just a lot.
Yep.
Yeah,
and that was a big part of how like Lycos got paid, was a lot of paid advertising.
Yeah. Was that kind of
PPM and cost per click?
Was that the big thing with the dot? I feel like I was really young for the .com boom, which I'm dating myself.
I mean,
kind of embarrassing.
It had come and gone by the time I got in the industry too.
Was that the big thing that like fueled that? Was the advertising money or?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of it was the advertising money, and I think people just they wanted to get in on the wave, right? Like the web was really starting to take hold. This was, Web 2.0 became a thing while I was leaving college. Right. Like now we talk Web 3 and all this sort of stuff. Like Web 2.0 was in its inception at the time, and HTML 4 and 5 were just starting to really take off and take hold. HTML5 really didn't become a thing till halfway through my career, maybe a third of the way through.
Yeah, I was going to say the web design class I took in school, I think we learned 4.
Yeah. So like, I was learning raw HTML and CSS back then, and now there's Canvas and all sorts of other different ways of programming.
Yeah,
stuff that passed me by at this point.
Huh. So you're at you said it was Lycos.
Lycos. Yeah.
Yep. Did it end by choice, or because it sounds like they were trying to hang on to like a dying form?
So funnily enough, they hung on till I believe it was 2012. They're still sort of around.
Yeah.
They're still sort of around. I believe they got sold again. I always check in once in a while. So at the time when I was there, they were acquired by a company from Korea called Daum. And Daum was a search engine company over there. And they sold, I believe it was like once or twice while I was there. And then, for good money too, like a solid few million, like hundreds of millions of dollars. And I'm like, wow, there's still that much value. And it's all the little umbrella products that come off of it. Angel Fire, Tripod, Gamesville at the time. Like this was back in the PopCap games era.
Oh, jeez.
Gamesville was huge when that was a thing.
Wait, Gamesville, is that Farmville?
No. This is the name of their PopCap sort of website.
Oh, okay. But Farmville wasn't a part of that.
No. This is pre-Farmville days. Even.
I heard the Ville and I was
you latch onto that, right? But no, it's funny, and I still check in from time to time just to see. I think the .com. I think you could still go to it nowadays. It's been a while, but yeah, they still hung on. When I left the organization, I was part of downsizing at the time. They had a few too many designers in the place.
Sure.
Similar to now, I feel like a lot of what we're seeing right now is during the COVID era, people had an influx of cash. And they hired a ton of people. Get them off the street, get them in our doors, and let's make sure that we have top class talent. And now that we're seeing downturn, we're seeing a lot of places start to bleed those folks out, or bleed out a fair amount of the people because they just overhired. Yeah,
LinkedIn and Instagram and like all of my social media is just wild right now. I thought we were kind of like. We're recording this. What is today? It's the 22nd of January. I thought we were kind of like, I thought all these layoffs were kind of going to be done by the end of last year, but it seems like it's still continuing, like through January, and like people are just like literally like recording their own layoffs and then like posting them online. It's just like, it's nuts.
Yeah,
it's so crazy.
It sucks to look at LinkedIn right now too, because like I want to help out everybody I know, and I'm just like, there's just so many people.
So many people. Yeah.
I always, knock on wood, I always feel lucky that we still have a job, but
there's no way all these jobs recover, right? Like there's no way like these jobs are all replaced with new tech jobs.
So yes and no. I feel like some places were just flat out just had far too much headcount, and some are evolving. Some are figuring out their way through AI and how it's going to influence their Some are just flat out replacing jobs with AI, and they're going to need to find prompters, right? Which to me doesn't sound super glamorous. I love prompting, but I don't want to be a prompt engineer. But that may be a thing, right? The other thing that's crazy for me to think about in UX UI in particular is like, how does a junior get in? You know, there's so much senior talent out there. There's so many high level talent out there.
Yeah,
for me, like I just whenever I see a junior, like we had some great interns pass through the program here. Yeah, and I'm like, man, just latch onto those guys because they you know. Who knows what they're going to find, you know, and they're talented enough. They'll find something. They'll land on their feet. But, you know, I worry about a lot of juniors. And like, I wonder, could I have even broken into the game now? Yeah. Leaving college the way I did back then. Like, thankfully for the internship, I felt well prepared to go into the market. But if you're not doing that kind of stuff now, I feel like, there were people back then that didn't even make it into the game.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like, to your point, there's so much talent. I mean, if we think about like the social media era, which is kind of like what led to all this overhiring, that's been going on now since like, I would say like 2008. Yep. Like 2008 to 10, I feel like is kind of when like Facebook and like really started blowing up, and MySpace kind of was winding down, and not Tom. Yeah, you think about all those people, like, that is, all those people have 10 years, more than 10 years experience now.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I think I'm sitting on 15 to 18 years experience technically.
So you're right. There are a lot of experienced people out there. So now, you're right. Like, what does the angle now become for new talent? Maybe it is like this AI thing, like
that and like content creation,
engineering, like the behavior of the AI. But you got content creation.
Yeah, and one thing that I'm seeing in the UX UI industry is there's a lot of pros who are getting into content creation and making sure that their voice is heard. Yeah. And then there's a lot of juniors. Like, one of the things that I'm so tired of seeing in UX UI right now is the this or that post.
What is that?
It's essentially...
This is not on my feed, so...
Yeah. So it's essentially two types of UI design, and both of them don't really answer the user question. They're just
it's just aesthetic preference.
Yeah, they're like, which is the better UX? And it's like, well, I put this button over here, and I put this button over here, and I might change up a little bit of the layout. And it's like, well, neither one of these did well for the user. So what exactly are you asking here? You're essentially asking for personal preference,
right,
and engagement. And that for me is like, it's just weird about the content creation game right now, and you know how somebody gets looked at as a pro, right? Like for me, I think, you know, I appreciate the opportunity to come on the podcast and do this, and you know, I think it's awesome to get somebody like you who's a pro in your space, you know, putting content out there to, you know, to show how a pro approaches it.
Yeah, you know? I mean, first of all, thank you. I appreciate that. That's very, very kind of you to say. But it's funny. I was having that exact same conversation with someone prior to starting this, which is I feel like you see a lot of like influencers in design who I wouldn't say are like working designers. You know what I mean? Like teaching about design. I guess it's basically like a design professor or a teacher or someone who's kind of gone into education, but I feel like they're kind of like learning theories and then relaying those theories without like implementing them. And having
the more you get into content creation, you'll start to hear of a term called clout chasing. Okay. And I feel like a lot of people on LinkedIn and just in general in our industries, like if they're not the strongest or they're, you know, they're trying to get seen by somebody, they're clout chasing like heck. They're putting content out there that it's like, you look at it yourself and you go, this is steering people in the complete wrong direction. Like, what are you doing?
That's interesting. There is way more content creation for UX UI though, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
Than industrial design. I guess like our field is smaller. It's probably significantly less industrial designers than UX UI designers, but there's also only like a very small handful of people who are I think like sharing their process, you know, like with full transparency. So I hope that it's something that like we see evolve more and more. But
let me flip it on you then, real quick. Is that something that you're allowed to share as you know? Are you stuck behind a lot of NDAs? Because like even in the UX UI industry, there's definitely that side of it, right? Where like I don't know how much of it I can put in my portfolio theoretically. Like you generally ask permission and then you say, hey, can I throw this in? And you'll find out how much of it you can, usually you wait for the product to get launched and you say, okay, let me do my case study.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing for us. I think people are definitely much more skittish because it's very hard to talk about like the making of something without because that would technically fall into like sharing industry secrets, which I think like
and there's
is
more
a legal
mess in your game too, right?
Yeah, way more patenting and there's just a lot more red tape. But at the same time, I don't know. I think people are just tend to be more hesitant.
Yeah.
I think there's a bigger mental component than there is like a real component.
Sure.
But I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting, man. It's a whole.
It's a side of the game I wish
I
could play in a little bit more, but I think I'd have to start back from square one to get into ID.
Yeah. So what do you think? Like, maybe just to like wind down here.
Sure.
What do you think is like the future of UX UI? Because I feel like we've kind of touched. There's so much turmoil and so much change that we've kind of like talked about, and you've kind of mentioned you've seen so many eras now, like. From pre.com to .com to web design to UX UI to like where do you,
next.
Like what do you see as like being the next trajectory for like tech or UX UI or I don't know.
I think I want to see what happens in the VR AR space a little bit more. I still feel like it's a gimmick, and I still feel like it hasn't gotten to the point where. And I'm afraid of that time too because I don't want to live my life in a headset. But I think that is the next step, right? Like we're just now starting to see Ray-Ban glasses with AI
I saw that.
and AR technology built in.
Yeah.
They tried the Google glasses, which were hideous, or Google Glass. I don't remember what it was, but it just felt
Google
like
Glass.
What's his name from what's it called from Dragon Ball with the little eyepiece.
Oh
right?
yeah.
Like, that's what I imagine when I looked at Google Glasses. But I think the more that starts to take off and gets integrated with AI functionality, I think that's where things are trying to go. Like Spline touches on it a little bit because people are talking about how to design for Apple Vision and making these 3i elements.
It is a completely like new frontier, right? Like it's a totally different way of thinking and like trying to like it's a totally different behavior that you're like trying to understand.
And at the same time, I'm scared to death of it because I got to learn it all.
Right?
For me, I'm like, man, when the heck am I gonna have time?
Yeah, I just don't know what to make of the VR, and I guess to a certain extent the AR. So I think I'm thinking more VR, but like it seems like the hardware development is so much deeper than the software development. Like I'm just not seeing the software there to like support the hardware. And to me the gap between like the Quest 3 and like just having glasses that are embedded with this stuff, I feel like that distance is too far.
Sure.
To like financially like make it. I mean, I'm sure we'll get there, but to me it's like not in the next 5 years. I think it's because as much as AI is speeding things up, like hardware development is not going to move that
and
fast.
Making it in a package that you can still wear at a cost that makes sense, right? Like,
exactly.
I mean, the Ray-Ban glasses are what, 400, I think, maybe 500. Like that is still extremely pricey. Like, you're paying that for Ray-Bans that aren't hooked up with AI, but still, that just feels really, really high. And I mean, that's gonna price out. Like we got to find a way to make hardware and software for everybody, right? Like we got to be able to pull everybody up at the same pace. If we price out the lower class, there's just not going to be anything available to them, right?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, speaking of which, did you order the Apple Vision Pro? What was the retail on that?
I think it's almost 4,000.
It's $4,000.
We might have to ask the company to pick one up.
Yeah, it's sold out, right?
I
think that's what Jose was saying. It is like 80,000 units or something. I don't know, something
crazy.
Nice, but...
it's not on my radar yet, but I would love to.
It's interesting.
I'm just starting to get into Quest and just playing around with it.
Nice.
I played around with the HoloLens a little bit. And a lot of those things have their own built-in UI. So for me, I think it's interesting to think about where, like, me personally comes into play, right? Because if Microsoft has its own UX UI for that, right? Then where do I play? Do I make my own app within this space.
There's just so much that can be done with it too. I feel like so much of like you'll see this. I feel like as you use the Quest more, but I feel like there's so many UIs that are just we're going to project a plane, like basically a 2D screen, and then there's buttons on it that you are pointing at and clicking. But I feel like that's such a miss.
Yeah, don't get me started on the pinch to grab it.
Yeah.
Like something's got to be done about that. I almost feel like you might as well just put the person in gloves. Like I think whenever I think of like what's a good UX UI for this, I'm like, why can't we just have Minority Report? Why can't we just?
That's what everybody wants.
Give me the dials. Give me a pair of gloves that
Iron Man.
Like give me something like that. Let me have Jarvis.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm curious to see where it all goes. Yeah, to your point, maybe it is like we'll start to see like the VR kind of like goggle eyewear thing start to merge with like these humane pin and the rabbit pin and like these AI pins basically. Sure. Like if those two things can kind of come together, then maybe that's where it starts to like have a...
And theoretically Jarvis is kind of the end game, and maybe that's a spot where UX UI designers end up, flexing out of, maybe there's a new direction that it has to go, right? Because the more we get AI voice training and assistance, right, the less there's going to be a need for traditional hand-drawn UX UI, right? It's going to be more about the prompts and the way that the user interacts with those. Yeah. That part of the game is just going to go away. It's still going to be needed, but you're not going to need as many of us, right?
Interesting, yeah. But still, like, someone has to figure that out, and there's no playbook. Yeah. So it's like
we're in the Wild West all over
It's like how many heads do you have to put together to solve that problem? Yep. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, maybe you need less people to like command the AI or do prompting or whatever it is, but to like solve new problems that are a completely new frontier, like I still think that will take
like-minded individuals, the team of like-minded individuals that can think about the user and the way that it's approached. I think that's the end game for all this is like you're UX and UI and ID all just kind of come together, and we're all sketching in a playground and figuring out how to deliver this tangible good to somebody. And it might not be on a 16:9 screen at that point. It might be on whatever that device ends up being.
Oh man, yeah, that's wild. Yeah, that's wild to think about, but it's exciting, man. It's like
I want to be part of the game.
Yeah, because I feel like sometimes I feel like I'm like the old man when it comes to technology. Like an old man when it comes to technology. I don't know. I'm a very like technology resistant person, but like, it's fun. It's fun to talk to you about it because it's like thinking about it as like a design problem or thinking about like, hey, if you have this completely new thing, figuring out how that. I don't know. That is like very enticing and exciting. So that's awesome. But well, cool, man. Dude, I appreciate you taking the time. It's
not about it. It's been fun.
It's late, so and I know you have a family. I have a family.
We are truly working late. The kids are going to be mad at us when we get home.
But we should probably get out of here and start our commute. We also live like a similar distance from the office.
Yeah, we got another little bit of time ahead of us.
Yeah. But I guess just to wind down, man. Like if people are interested in like reaching out to you or they want to learn more, or like
they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn at Dave Santos. I am working on a secret project right now to get some content creation out there.
Nice. That's
so
exciting.
There will be something UX UI related. I always say that at some point I want to get into more strategy and pure teaching, more so than staying in the game and being the one to produce. So for me, there will be something coming out soon in the UX UI front.
Nice.
Not ready yet to talk about it. Got a name, got some concepts, but soon enough. And then davidsantos.work for my personal site, but that hasn't necessarily been updated in God knows how long.
Yeah. But all one word, right? David Santos.
With .work instead of .com.
.work, yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. I appreciate it. And,
definitely appreciate you giving me the chance to get on here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fun to get a new perspective and get out of industrial design for an hour.
No doubt about it.